Risen dramatically in the last few years. The Hong Kong-ASEAN FTA is just one example of the progress ASEAN is making as it moves towards economic integration. Asia House has had a particular focus on ASEAN in the last 3 or 4 years. We recognise the extraordinary opportunities in the region. And the discussion around ASEAN has changed dramatically outside of this region in the last few years. There's now a real focus on it and real attention being paid in Europe and the UK in particular on ASEAN. Now we see ASEAN as a key player in the global trade order as it shifts, as it changes, as we were discussing a bit earlier, and we felt it was essential as part of this conference to take a closer look at ASEAN. In a moment we'll welcome a panel of speakers, including the Vice Minister of Trade for Vietnam, who has kindly agreed to join us today. But first, it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage His Excellency Dr. Lim Hong Hin, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN, to deliver the keynote address. Dr. Lim.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the introduction. I think it's still morning. I'm coming from Jakarta times. Your Excellency, Lord Stephen Green, Chairman of Asia House, Honorable Westminster Khan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by congratulating the Asia House for holding its signature conference at a very appropriate time, and also the astute team of Asia Trade in a new global order. I'm also pleased to share with you today the ASEAN perspective to this theme, focusing on 3 key points. Number 1, the ASEAN outlook on globalization, free trade and regional integration. Second, how the ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, will maintain its upward trajectory and grow momentum. And last but not least, how will ASEAN position itself in the global trade and governance. On the first point, in recent years, we have observed growing protectionism sentiments and also economic nationalism and populism, particularly in the West, as evident in recent events such as the US withdrawal from TPP and the Brexit. These trends are somewhat more subdued in the region, and the general sentiment to open regionalism's approach that ASEAN has been following remains positive. The AEC Blueprint 2025, the master plan that guides ASEAN further economic integration agenda following the formal establishment of AEC in 2015, explicitly recognized a global ASEAN as one of its 5 main characteristics. The blueprint outlined a more pronounced external economic relations strategy, going beyond just free trade agreement, to look at strengthening strategic engagement with regional and global partners, adopting common position in regional and international fora, enhancing engagement with the non-FTA partners, and then supporting the multilateral trading system, and actively participating in regional fora and promoting engagement with global and regional institutions. In practice, during the 31st ASEAN Summit and related summit held in Manila 2 weeks ago, we have observed the signing of the ASEAN-Hong Kong-China Free Trade Agreement, and also the ASEAN-Hong Kong-China Investment Agreement, and also the conclusion of the negotiation on services, movement of natural person, investment under the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and also the holding of the first ever RCEP Leader Summit. All this send out a very clear message that ASEAN is open and is ready for business. Similarly, the recent progress made by the TPP countries is important not only in substance, but also in signaling that to the world in many parts that globalizations and trade continue to have that political support. ASEAN, however, will not take the current support to globalization, trade and regional integration for granted. A key lesson to be learned from the growing anti-globalization rhetoric is that the need to recognize and to address early public misperception and discontent on the perceived impact of globalization and trade. ASEAN's current success can be attributed to its being deeply embedded in the global value chain. With the region collectively, it ranked 4th top trading economy and the 5th largest FDI recipient in 2016. It is not possible for the region to turn its back against its very strength. It is therefore important to ensure the ASEAN Economic Community is participatory and inclusive, so that its potential and benefits can be shared broadly among the stakeholders across and within the member state and even beyond. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on the second point, ASEAN growth performance has indeed been robust, and the region has grown into a recognized global growth center, with the growth averaging at 5.1% annually from 2010 to 2016. ASEAN growth have consistently outpaced the global growth. In 2016, ASEAN combined GDP put the region collectively as the world's sixth largest economy, or the third largest in Asia after China and India. If the current growth momentum can be maintained, the region is set to become the world's fourth largest in just a matter of decades. While the fundamentals are strong, from having a relatively young population, 53% of the population in ASEAN is below 30 years old, hence a broad productive age workforce, to a growing middle-class population that could readily serve as a dynamic market. However, ASEAN must not turn complacent. The current work must continue, effort must be intensified, particularly in the area of trade facilitation, connectivity, and also narrowing the development gap between its members. At the same time, the world is also evolving rapidly and less predictably. In the face of the global megatrend and emerging issue, ASEAN must go above and beyond its usual way of conducting business. An important backdrop to this is the onset of the fourth industrial revolution, which would affect not only how we do business, but also how we live and how we interact with each other and how we govern and be governed. The digital age calls for, in addition to the imperative change in mindset, different regulation, nimble institution, digital curriculum, skill, and workforce. All this cannot be done overnight, but ASEAN cannot afford any further delay. The intensification of the work on electronic commerce under the new economic blueprint is a good start, but the key is in the implementation, both at regional and national level. But even if electronic commerce covers only a small part of digital age, more thought must also be given to other related issues, such as fintech and also cybersecurity. Conversation must also take place comprehensively, holistically, across the ASEAN community, from political security to economic and to social culture. Beyond the fourth industrial revolution, to maintain the growth momentum and trajectory, the AEC must also address the issue of sustainability, part of its growth strategy. Growth and sustainability are not mutually exclusive. In fact, if properly addressed, sustainability could turn into a strength and into a comparative advantage for the region to build its long-term competitiveness. ASEAN must also leverage on its potential, on its micro and SME, in short, MISME, and also the region entrepreneur spirit. MISME startup entrepreneurs are the new source of innovation, and hence their value, development, and internationalization must be encouraged and also promoted. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on the third point, given its growing economic prowess, ASEAN must no longer see itself as a rule taker in the global and regional economic architecture and trade governance. Moving forward, it will be expected to take a more proactive role, particularly in the context of shifting geopolitical economy, which has led to a change in the proponent of the market and also the multi-trading system. ASEAN will need to reinforce its centrality in the emerging regional economic architecture. ASEAN involvement and leadership in RCEP negotiation with its 6 FTA partners is a linchpin of its external relations strategy. A successful conclusion of RCEP will see the creation of the world's largest trade bloc, covering almost half of the world population, almost a third of the global trade and outputs, and also a fifth of the global FDI flow. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, ASEAN can and should be expected to play a greater role in the new global trade order, and the region is unlikely to turn inward to maintain growth momentum. ASEAN will need to leverage on the power of innovation and entrepreneurship. The region will also not shy away from influencing and shaping the regional economic architecture, one which would embrace innovation and partnership. The coming years will be an exciting period for ASEAN. I therefore look forward to welcoming you to invest in and grow with our region. Thank you.
Dr. Lim, thank you very much. Now move to our panel where we're going to explore ASEAN a little more closely. I'd like to invite the chair of our panel, Don Kainak, to just take the stage. Don Kainak is chairman of Eastsprings Investments, the Asian investment organization of Prudential and one of Asia's leading asset managers. He's also chairman of the EU ASEAN Business Council, a senior fellow of the Harvard Law School program on international financial systems, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, among many other things. Don, thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Michael. May I ask our other panelists to please come up and join me on the stage, and then I'll be introducing you. Thanks very much. Well, our first panel took us through the new global order, and now we're zeroing in on a very important region of the world, which, as both Dr. Lim and Michael have focused in, is ASEAN. I think the word I'd like to start in framing this discussion around is the word of optimism. One word, optimism. ASEAN's growth rate, as Dr. Lim said, has been better than the global average for a long time. Our own group, Prudential, has been trading and investing, since that's the subject of our panel, for over 90 years in ASEAN, the first operation being in Malaysia in 1924. And today, managing throughout Asia $170 billion assets under management, and a big part of that invested in the ASEAN region. Optimism is widely felt among European business. This year, actually very recently, in September, the EU ASEAN Business Council released its annual business sentiment survey. And in that survey, 71% of companies responding said that ASEAN was playing a more important role and more important size of their global revenue. If we ask how many companies plan to increase the level of trade and investment in ASEAN in the next 5 years, 86% said they plan to increase. And this morning's panel, the word job destruction came up, the concern about technology destroying jobs. Well, I have good news for those worried about job destruction. We also asked those same companies, do you plan to increase or maintain versus shrink your level of jobs, your hiring? And 94% said they plan to increase or maintain jobs. In fact, 58% said they're going to increase. So job destruction is far from the minds of European companies that are participating in ASEAN. The second phrase, I guess, or word, let's use a word, inflection. Are we at an inflection point, though, or a crossroads in ASEAN imposing an issue? I'd like to pose that point because if we look at some of the statistics, there are question marks still before us. Dr. Lim said we shouldn't be complacent. I think it's very true. The recent foreign direct investment statistics for ASEAN as a region, FDI actually declined in 2016. And that was in spite of Europe having an almost 50% increase in its FDI into the region. Trade actually peaked. Trade with the world actually peaked in 2014 and has actually declined a bit. And intra-ASEAN trade, if we compare it with other regions, is still hovering around 23%, which compares with about 60% in Europe. And we might expect ASEAN would be lower than Europe, but actually NAFTA is 40% of its trade was within NAFTA. So there's still room for that connectivity and that integration to play within ASEAN for more. So I guess one of the questions our panel needs to address, or in addition to optimism, is who will be driving that integration further now that the U.S. has pulled out of TPP. We've just had a good discussion around the New World Order in that respect, but will that drive come from internal leadership? What role will Europe play? What role will China play in that? And we have an outstanding panel to address these issues from various different perspectives. Let me just briefly introduce them. To my immediate right, His Excellency Tran Quoc Khan, Vice Minister of Industry and Trade of Vietnam. His Excellency has held the position of Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade since September of 2010 and is also the chief negotiator for the government of Vietnam's trade negotiation team. He's one of the most experienced trade officials in the region, and we're very pleased to have him on our panel. Next to the Vice Minister, Dr. Andrea Frenzel, who is President of Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and Australia-New Zealand at BASF SE, and has held that post since early 2017, I believe.
Yes, correct.
Before that, Andrea had a number of senior executive positions at BASF, including in Europe, North America, and Asia. And to just name a couple, she was the Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning at BASF in Germany, and before that, VP of Business Management Pigments in North America. To her right, Carsten Hess, Vice President and Head of Corporate Public Policy, Asia Pacific, and Europe, Middle East, Africa, I guess everything except the United States and Europe. Most of the world, okay, for DHL, which means Carsten, like some of the people in this audience, lives on airplanes. Prior to that, he was in the head of European corporate representation for Deutsche Post DHL in Brussels, Belgium. And to Carsten's right, Christine Ip, Managing Director, CEO of Greater China, UOB Limited. Christine joined UOB in 2011, and as Managing Director, she's responsible for developing the bank's Greater China strategy. She's also the CEO of UOB Hong Kong, has held that post since 2012. And I would say we heard Cesar Purisima has received many awards on the previous panel. Well, Christine has also received many awards, and just to name a couple, she received the Asia Retail Congress Award for Best International Retail Banker in 2008, and China Women Association Top 100 Greater China Senior Women Executives in 2012. So our panel, as you can see, represents a tremendous variety and very deep experience in the region. And I guess I'd like to start and let each one make some opening comments. And then we really would like to make this a lively discussion, and we will have, in addition to some back and forth up here, we really would like to have the audience participate and raise some questions. So please, as you're listening, be keeping your questions in mind. Let me start with the Vice Minister. We were just we're following this new global order panel in the beginning. So as you reflect on Vietnam's position and ASEAN's position in the new global order, would you like to share some thoughts about that?
Yes, thank you, Donald. Before speaking on that theme, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Lord Green and Michael Lawrence for giving me an opportunity to be here and to talk with you about the new global order and what Vietnam and ASEAN can do in order to help everybody to face with the new order like that. And this is my first time that I accept an invitation to be a panelist, and that is why if you can see me being not so comfortable, then please don't laugh. Okay? It's the first time.
It's okay, it's all friends here.
So for 70 years, you can remember that the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade was established in 1947, and for 70 years long, we've been building up the new rules for international trade and investment and playing by those new rules in order to set up the whole new pattern of international trade and investment. We constructed our supply chain, we built up our business model based on freer international trade and investment. And suddenly one day, it seems that everything seems to be more complicated than that. And our business model can face disruption. So what we can do? What do we do? I don't know what you will do, but I will tell you what government should do. So look at ASEAN. I'm not here to speak on behalf of China or US or Japan or even the European Union, but I can speak about ASEAN and Vietnam. What do we do? So in ASEAN, you can see very clearly what Dr. Lim already mentioned, that we keen to go forward with our liberalization program. So we're keen on continuing our economic community, the AEC. You've seen the blueprints, and you've seen that we've done everything we can in order to liberalize not only trade in goods, but also trade in services and investment and the movement of natural persons. And we're keen on continue our FTA with our dialogue partners. And the most relevant proof could be the newest FTA that we signed with Hong Kong. So we're having now the 6th FTA with our partners already. And we will continue to do more with Canada, for example, with EU, for example. And then a number of us will continue with other initiatives. We have 4 ASEAN countries participating in TPP and now the CPTPP. And we, together with other 6 dialogue partners, continue to negotiate on something called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. So we're keen on continuing the liberalization process in the region. We continue to follow the regionalism. But that is something that we need to bear in mind, that it is not enough. Donald mentioned that the trade having the tendency of decreasing and investment also. So it brings us to something like that we need to think not only about the external integration process like that, but we really need to think about our internal domestic situation. I mean the behind the borders measure. First of all, you need to make your business environment more business friendly. And second, that you need to think about the reinvestment in your infrastructure in order to make yourself attractive. I mean the whole ASEAN country, more attractive to foreign investment. And of course, now we have the Industry 4.0, you need to prepare your government, your people with the Industry 4.0 like that. So instead of going forward with liberalization in the region, sometimes you need to look at yourself and try your best in order to improve the environment for the businesses. Only by then you can make yourself attractive enough to foreign direct investment to come. And only by that you can maintain your centrality, you can maintain your growth momentum in the future. And that is what the government of ASEAN can do.
Thank you. Andrea, from a business perspective, from BASF's perspective, how would you talk about ASEAN and the things which are important?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me here to discuss trade and investment here in ASEAN, dear Honorable Mr. Tran and dear colleague speakers and ladies and gentlemen. For us, ASEAN is a very important region, but before going into this, maybe let me touch a little bit on who BASF is. We are a world-leading chemical company. We have about 58 billion euros of sales per year. About 20% of that is actually captured in Asia-Pacific. And I think it's fair to say that we probably touch almost every industry you can imagine that is requiring chemicals. And for us, ASEAN is important because we actually have about 2 billion of sales in Asia-Pacific in this sub-region. That's substantial. It's about 1/3 of our business outside of Greater China. It's a very fast-moving sub-region for us, and we have about 4,000 employees in this region operating in 12 companies. So this gives you a little bit already a feel for the size and the importance of this sub-region for us. We have been in Asia and in ASEAN for several decades already, so we have, let's say, learned some of the lessons. And from a chemical industry perspective, I think it's fair to say that on the one hand, it's a very diverse sub-region with countries of very different maturity levels. At the same time, we perceive it as markets with a lot of similarity in terms of the dynamic, the energy, and the growth enthusiasm that we see here. So let me quickly touch on the 4 lessons, which in the end lead you also to the conclusion one size doesn't fit all for us as a chemical industry. So the first example is, in the end, that we came to the conclusion we have to think global, but in the end we have to act very local. And I will use Vietnam and the construction industry as a good example here. We started our business in Vietnam by bringing in products from Europe with distribution. This is a quite typical approach. If you are producing industry, you want to somehow build your market. But in 2009, we came to the conclusion that we have to invest in our own assets, construction chemicals, production, which we did, and then expanded with the second plant in 2015. This, in the end, gave us the chance to cooperate with local partners and have a much closer link to the market itself, which is very difficult if you bring in technologies from the outside. And in the end, this has also enabled us to participate in key projects in this country. So, for example, Landmark 81 is a project where we are participating in, where it's probably fair to say with the technologies we bring, we can offer access to new opportunities and technologies in general. The next example I would like to take is, in the end, the trend of halal. And this, for me, is a good lesson in terms of we have to understand what trends are happening in the region, but at the same time, we have to constantly think about how can we scale it. Why is scale so important for us? It's simply because as a chemical industry, it's an industry of global competitiveness. So if you want to be competitive in this environment, you have to have a certain critical size. Halal is a trend which we have seen now becoming more and more important. Let me pick Indonesia as one example. Here we are seeing more requests and even the trend being put into law now, which we have to react to. We have now built a portfolio of about 150 products which are actually certified by halal from the whole start of the production through the whole value chain, even up to the supply chain. And it's something which we are observing in other countries as well now, and it's a good example how trends actually drive different technologies for my industry, but at the same time also how they spread in the sub-region further. The third lesson learned for me is under the headline of local capabilities. As BASF, we have 5 shared service centers globally. In 2005, we had to make the decision where to put the one in Asia Pacific. And we very quickly came to the conclusion that Kuala Lumpur is a very good location for this reason, simply because of this very multinational environment of people operating out of ASEAN. We have now a center there which is servicing our IT, our supply chain financing with services to 16 countries in the region. And the colleagues there have the chance of job opportunities in a multinational environment. And the company, in the end, benefits from the chance to tap into local talent with about 7 languages available in this one spot. So it's a huge asset in terms of local capabilities we can tap into here. The last lesson learned I would put under the headline becoming stronger but looking beyond borders. And here I think we touch on the topic you just mentioned before in terms of the trade. I explained before that my industry is a very global one. We have to compete globally and we have to have a certain size in what we offer. Construction is maybe a bit of a specific example because it is a very local industry. Otherwise, it's a very global business. And here we clearly see the need to drive the free trade agreements further forward. We see the need to reduce non-tariff trade barriers in the sub-region in terms of free flow of talents between the countries, free flow of goods between the countries, exchange of capital. This is something which for us is very important in the long run, and we very much hope for the push and continuation of the negotiation for the EU-ASEAN trade agreement that is now having to follow the Vietnam, which currently has been signed, and Singapore. So to sum this up, ASEAN is a very important sub-region for us. We have been here for quite some time. We want to stay, and we really hope and also very much support the initiatives to drive this stronger link between the countries and outside of ASEAN.
Thank you. So Carsten.
Sure. Thank you, Don. Thanks again also to Asia House for this excellent panel and organization of this event. I think everybody knows or think they know DHL, but maybe just very briefly, DHL is in Asia and in the rest of the world with 3 or 4 divisions. You know all about DHL Express, but we have also warehousing, contract logistics, which is DHL Supply Chain. We have also big container
Traffics, which is more the DHL global forwarding side. And in a couple of ASEAN countries, we have done this year a market entry, which is our fourth division, which is almost like a startup, which we call DHL e-commerce. So that's purely B2C cross-border parcel shipment, which is not an express, so not a kind of higher price express B2B product. And I think that shows you a little bit the prospects we are seeing in the region of ASEAN in particular, but also in the rest of the world. So the world is changing. We heard this morning. ASEAN has become not just a fast-growing market for manufacturing and services, which we supply with our divisions, but basically what we see is a really strong demand on the small and medium-sized companies setting up global trade because of the help of the internet. So basically we're at a real revolution in ASEAN where you can see that everybody who has probably a little offline retail shop can decide to go tomorrow on the internet and become a global trader. And that's happening. So we see intra-ASEAN cross-border growth rates of volumes of B2C shipments coming from the internets by 12 to 15%. So it's even that strong that even our Express division, which used to do only B2B, is now picking up more and more volume, which is B2C e-commerce shipments. So the world is a big conversion, which brings a lot of opportunities for us to further invest. Nevertheless, we invest because our customers, whether they're small and medium-sized or large manufacturing companies, actually demand us to be there and to help them to ship the stuff from A to B. And I think this is the really exciting stuff. So if you just watched the news last week, we announced that we will invest over $360 million in next year in our data center. It's just a data center, not a warehouse. I shouldn't say just a data center. In our data center in Sabayajaya in Malaysia. And it's needed basically because there's so much traffic and track and trace demanded by customers that we need to upgrade the whole infrastructure. And this data center is connected with one data center in Europe and Prague and one in the US. So basically 24/7 day and night data traffic will enable the customer to know where's my shipment. We have invested recently in many of our facilities, airports like Changi in Singapore recently. It was about 60 million euro investment. We just announced investment here in Hong Kong, also 335 million in almost doubling the capacity on our express hub here in Hong Kong. And a lot of that traffic goes also into ASEAN countries. We see that, we heard it before, there is a growing very young workforce, which becomes more and more skilled, contrary to the developed economies where we heard also this morning that we have a demographic, rather aging problem where probably robots will help in the future. And I'm less skeptic than what we heard from Cesar Purissima. I'm not sure he's still here. We talked a lot about protectionism. I think in this part of the region, there is less protectionism, less talk about protectionism. I think it's much more optimism. We heard MISME, this medium or micro and small and medium-sized enterprises having a strong growth, and that's actually next to e-commerce, where we see a big wave of prosperity coming in the ASEAN area. So overall, I would say that our growth and investment scenario is very positive. I think also that ASEAN, with negotiating, concluding free trade agreements, is on the right path. And you have some front-running countries. Of course, you have in Vietnam, who has already concluded a free trade agreement with the EU. We're now talking about starting a region-to-region FTA with ASEAN and the EU. Of course, His Excellency just mentioned that the TPP-11 or CPTPP as it's called now, I think that sets standards for trade, for cross-border trade and trade facilitation, which we as DHL really like to use, because it will help and empower your small and medium-sized companies to reduce the complexity when they want to do cross-border trade. We can talk a bit about this later. I think the higher standards coming from free trade agreements is actually very helpful for all ASEAN economies. It will really empower and will give you almost a manual for prosperity if ASEAN governments are willing to implement that. And I think that's the key for the debate. Also, implementation is key. You have all the tools now there. You're getting more with more free trade agreements, but it's about willing to implement them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carsten. So we've heard from Andrea about providing chemicals to all industries which use chemicals, and Carsten has explained very well how DHL, Deutsche Post, is in the midst of providing logistical services to all sorts of industries. But of course, we know that nothing happens without finance. So from the perspective of one of ASEAN's leading financial institutions and seeing both from the ASEAN perspective but also the Greater China perspective, Christine, could you?
Yeah, thank you. As rightly pointed out by Chairman, that definitely for all industry, no matter how a country would like to grow, first of all, they need the enzymes from the banks, from financial industry to promote the growth. So definitely, I must say that for United Overseas Bank, being home in the ASEAN base, that we significantly benefit and will be able to be the catalyst to make this happen. To give you a little bit of information, United Overseas Bank, we are actually one of the biggest ASEAN banks in the region. Among the 10 countries in ASEAN, we are actually in 8 out of them. So the past growth, we are really significantly being benefit of it. When we talk so much about the concept, I think people need to learn how to get the funding, how to find the right partners. I think the toughest time for the financial crisis in 2008, there are only left with a handful of banks that are AA rated. So we are one of them. And during that period of time, we are also one of the very, very few banks in the world that we do not require additional capital injection. So we are actually among the 50 safest banks in the world, which is very important, it's critical, especially to the sovereign. When the government, they want to deal with an organization, to deal with the bank, be able to help them to grow. I think that is very critical. So with so much that we talk about the opportunities, young population, increasing literacy, urbanizations. So what I would like to share is how we as a bank will be able to partner to support the growth of the company as well as all these countries. So we are actually not just an ASEAN bank, but on a global front, we are very well covered. We are a global bank that had branches in London, in LA, in New York, in Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, in India, in Mumbai, in Japan, Korea. And the way we do it is our home base is in Singapore and ASEAN. So we are actually the only Singapore bank that we have branches and 100% owned subsidiary in Thailand, in Indonesia, and in Malaysia. And we are very pleased that this year we also get Vietnam support to set up the first foreign bank, being able 100% owned in principle subsidiary that will be able to work on through this. So with this, that's why we see that now we have the right place, be able to help the company to grow. Last week, actually, I just came back from Kunming, and we just opened our Kunming branch. So Kunming is strategically located within Yunnan province, where is creating a very good Mekong Delta connectivity belt between Yunnan, Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar. And for Vietnam, so basically, there's a huge opportunities we can see over there. And instead of like the more mature economy, we see ASEAN be able to leapfrog the growth. So by building up our capability, supporting the growth, that's why we see that definitely there's a place that we can grow into. In Myanmar, we are also already set up our branches, our rep office actually more than 20 years ago. And in year 2015, we actually set up our branch there. So together with Vietnam, together with Myanmar and Thailand, many of our customers in the region can use our online technology, be able to provide funding transfer, as well as to ease and build up their capabilities. So I think the benefit of having fintech, innovation, creativity, we'll be able to help these companies, government, as they continue to grow. Now, when people start to talk about fraud, about the worry about cybersecurity, and at the same time, UOB also help Indonesia to set up a credit bureau system, which we use some smart technology, so that whenever our customers would like to onboard new customers or other financial institution, they be able to use this platform to check whether the customer they're onboarding they are of good quality or not. And this is very critical because you imagine when there's a new economy starting off, what are the most important things? First, just then we talk about infrastructure, energy, construction, and of course we need hospitality, we need hotel be able to support all this. So UOB, with our knowledge and our based in Singapore, that's why we be able to help to create and provide funding support to all these customers. And more importantly, because we have 100% owned subsidiary, we have actually 400 retail branches in the region. So when the customers like BASF, DHL, and these companies, the employees, expatriates, a lot of them, they need retail banking support as well. So we basically provide an end-to-end capability solutions to provide a lot of our customers, from corporate to retail to their senior executive to their local employees, be able to provide the solutions. And I think one point I really want to highlight, and probably all of you will experience, when you venture into a new country, you have to face law, accountancy, accounting policies differences, cultural gaps. So what we have is uniquely, we set up a foreign direct investment unit in 10 jurisdictions, whereby we help our customer as they go into venture into be it Vietnam or to Indonesia, they be able to connect our people, and then we will bring them to see the various government bodies to provide a one-stop solution for them, and then be able to connect them to accounting firm, legal firms, as well as to various suppliers. So as you can see, it's a really one-stop solution, and we provide that free of charge because we see that that is the only way we be able to connect the dots, connecting customer, so that they make them feel at ease. So the role for me as a Greater China head is under the Belt and Road initiatives. We have to bring a lot of Chinese customers, be it SOE, privately owned enterprise, or SME, when they come down to Southeast Asia, to ASEAN, we'll be able to help them to provide one-stop solution, and vice versa. When our ASEAN customers, which are home base, when we know them so well, when they come to my parts of the world, to Hong Kong and China, we'll provide financing solutions for them so that they be able to feel at ease when they invest in China. And many of the big customers, when they're not too sure about the quality, because they don't know the customers in ASEAN, but we, being a connector, a super connector, we be able to provide the right advice to the customers. So I guess these are the real practical way as a financial institution, as a ASEAN-based financial institution. That's the way we make a difference. We be able to relate and connect with our customers in the region.
Thank you. Let me come back to the Vice Minister with a question. You mentioned what happens behind the border is very, very important going forward. And one of the things, I think there's been extraordinary progress, we would all admit, on tariffs across the ASEAN region coming down by more than 50% from 2000 to 2015. And really, tariffs are much less of an issue today in regard. But at the same time, the number of non-tariff barriers, which are cataloged by ASEAN research institutes, have tripled from 2,000 to more than 6,000 over that same period. This seems to be a very challenging issue, and I'll get our business colleagues to comment on some of the issues they face maybe. But how do you see this playing out in the context of that you talked about behind the border and some of the, do you see this as an area where ASEAN can make some breakthroughs in the next 5 years?
Yes. First of all, it is a bit difficult to make a distinction between the non-tariff measures and the non-tariff barriers, because you have non-tariff measures everywhere you go. But if a government applies the non-tariff measure in a too extensive manner and with a different goal, then it can become the non-tariff barriers that the business community doesn't like it. So, first of all, I don't criticize the NTM, the non-tariff measures. We're talking about the non-tariff barriers only. And second, you're right. When you open up the economy, sometimes you're facing with reluctance, you're facing with resistance from inside, and sometimes being affected by some vested interest that you would like to have something to protect some vested group from the impact from outside. And that is why you have the intention to use the non-tariff measure here and there in order to protect a little bit your vested group like that. And that should be avoided. That should be avoided. So on ASEAN level, I think that we are doing a lot of things in order to avoid that kind of thing. First of all, we would like to raise the transparency. So in ASEAN, I believe that we have something like, we will strictly implement the obligation of notifying all the ASEAN members of the NTM that we are using. And second, we are creating a database. I understand that the Deputy Director General Secretary already mentioned about that. We like to see the whole transparent system. What are you applying in your country and what trouble that you may cause the business community? And second, we are promoting the consultation with the business community. For example, in Vietnam, you see that twice a year, my government will be meeting with the business community where they can raise their hand and talk about our NTM. And that is why we can follow the concerns of the business community, and we can discover the issues very quickly and try to find a way in order to make the business community happier with our environment. And let alone, we also implementing a lot of facilitation program in ASEAN, for example, the ASEAN single window and etc. So by combining a lot of measures like that, we very much hope that we can deal with the issues of non-tariff barriers. And we make our very big focus on the constant consultation with the business community. But there is one thing, based on the experience of my country, I think that we should do that based on one perception, that we do that for ourselves. We eliminate the non-tariff barriers. We talk with the business community for our interest. You can only succeed if you address the non-tariff barriers in that manner. You don't address the non-tariff barriers under the pressure of the business community or under pressure of anybody. You do it voluntarily for your benefit, because we can see the benefit in reducing the non-tariff barriers like that. And let me tell you, my ministry, in this 2017, we already eliminate 58% of our border control. So look at the list of the commodity that should go through the MOIT control before coming into Vietnam. We have something like 100%, and this year my minister instructed to cross out 58% of those commodities. So if you come to Vietnam now, those commodities, they don't need to do any test at the border anymore. You bring the good to your warehouse in Vietnam, and then you bring that good to any laboratory in order to announce that you meet the requirement of Vietnam. You don't need to wait at the border anymore. So this is the very good elimination, 58%. And look at the condition for doing business in Vietnam. We eliminate 50% of the condition. So it would be much easier for our Vietnamese company and somehow the foreign direct investment to come and to set up the companies in Vietnam to do business. So it's very important. You do it for yourself. You don't do it under any pressure. You don't do it under pressure of business community or under pressure of your partner or your neighbor. You do it for yourself. So if you have that kind of perception, you can deal with the non-tariff barriers issues.
Thank you. I think that's a very critical perspective to bring, that this is not something you do for business, or it is something you do for the benefit of the country and its citizens. And I think what I guess I'd like to do is to turn it over to Andrea and maybe Karsten to make some comments, because I know you have examples of things that you could do better and perhaps lead to more location of supply chains investment in ASEAN if some of these, which would go to the benefit of the countries and the citizens. Either one of you want to say something?
Okay.
Karsten?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I was thinking about this example His Excellency just gave to us. I think your country is certainly one of the front runners in ASEAN. I think also because you have agreed to higher standards, TPP 11 or FTA with the EU. And I think even if you look at the 2013 WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement of Bali, implementing that is very helpful because it has some standards to remove NTBs, such, for example, expedited shipments. And that's exactly where DHL is having a big interest in. Just to give you another probably idea how it impacts your country, even though it's not an NTB in your country. So talking to your colleagues from the other ASEAN governments would be also helpful sometimes. ASEAN is very strong when it comes to manufacturing of what we call kind of playing the networked industry. So you manufacture components and spare parts in several ASEAN countries and ship them to one country, like to an automotive manufacturing site in Vietnam at the end. So what we face, for example, I think we could probably double road transport on large part of ASEAN if we would remove NTBs. To give you one example, a neighboring ASEAN country ships with a truck with DHL or another company into a next ASEAN country, and half of the truckload is destined to stay in that country, and the other half would continue to be shipped to Vietnam, to your country, for automotive manufacturing, for example. So we are obliged by law of that particular country to basically split into two trucks. So we cannot have what we call transshipment, have one truckload where 50% will be unloaded in that particular country and the other 50% can be shipped over the border to you. So which obviously it doubles the cost because you have to put two half-empty trucks on the road from that particular country. So that's just a very, very typical example where basically removing these non-tariff barriers would help. And I think that's something you have to talk, and you have the blueprint, it's all there, it's all on paper. You have to just explain that it harms your own business. It harms the business in that particular country who doesn't allow transshipments because basically there's less stops and there's less trade volumes passing through the country at the end because basically we just say we can't do it. It's too costly or customers will not accept it. The second one is bringing me back to e-commerce and SMEs. I think if you see, if let's say you're a small entrepreneur in Nha Trang and you want to ship to the other 9 ASEAN countries, you start setting up your internet shop. That's all very easy. I mean, that's either you go and get hosted on Alibaba or Amazon, or you do it yourself with software. That's very, very easy today. But then you start to look into the different duties and the different customs clearance procedures, and that's normally where a small company just gives up and just say, well, I don't know how to do it. They come sometimes to us, of course, we as DHL say, well, we can help you, we can either do the brokerage for you, we can kind of inform you about the different rules. But a lot of MSMEs right now, they just say it's too complex. Or they use some gray channels avoiding VAT and duties, which is a big discussion we're having right now. So they use gray channels to ship across the border, which shouldn't be the case, which triggers a reaction then from customs side and from the finance ministry, like, oh, we're losing control and we don't get the revenues. I think this is the other kind of area which we need to find new solutions because internet is growing so fast, technology is just pushing it, so it's gonna happen anyway. So do we want to get a control and make it simple and pragmatic for the SMEs and for ourselves, or do we let it slip? I think these are two typical NTB, I would say, big opportunities where you can really increase the size of business very quick.
I would maybe give it a spin in 2 different directions. The one is because you mentioned the pressure of the business for the country and what is the target for the country itself. The way I look at it is I think it's about how can you join forces. Because if I look at many of the manufacturing industries and also my own, I think coming into new regions, building up business also means setting up somehow new standards, bringing in new technologies into these countries, and they can in the end enable an improvement, as you also described it, at the same time. So car accidents or traffic deaths are still a key issue in the ASEAN countries. There's many technologies out there that can be applied if there is certain acceptance of standards and the free trade coming with it. And I think this is something where clearly the industry as well as the governments really can join forces together. So I think from that angle, I think that's where we have to drive the discussion towards. The second topic is really on the sharing of people and the free flow of people. My observation is, especially in Asia, when you have smaller countries or businesses growing, you cannot justify expertise of people in all of the spots. Mm-hmm. So you build it and you have to rely on people moving in and out to bring in the expertise, at the same time take expertise with them again. And here the easier the access of workers to the different countries is, the more you also here facilitate, in my opinion, the development overall to the benefits of both. So those would be two examples I would share where I think there can still be work done to the benefit in the end of the sub-region and the businesses.
Thank you. Vice Minister, you wanted to...
Yes, I fully agree with them. The harmonization of standards is very, very important. Yeah. Not only for production and for our services, but also for the financial sector. If you want to operate on the regional basis, then you need to have, for example, accounting discipline. You cannot do business across the border if you face a different accounting disciplines like that. So harmonization is something very important. And we've been very active in ASEAN, but I need to recognize that the resources still very limited. We need to think more about that because the time doesn't wait. Time doesn't wait. The people will go where the market is biggest and the standards is harmonized in that market, for example, in the European Union. So that is why in our case, we participating in TPP, CPTPP. And then we're participating in something like the RCEP negotiation. And we are one among the strong supporters of region-to-region discussion between EU and ASEAN. Because if you have the big region like that, if you can have the big region, and if you can have the agreement of the people to harmonize the standards, the benefits will be very, very big. So I fully agree with you. And second, about the freer flow of the people. On these particular issues, I take the liberty to have a little different view on that because you see, it seems to me that beside the inclusivity issues that we are having, so we raise the issue of inclusivity because we don't want to see the reluctance or resistance to globalization. But now you can see that a number of countries are facing the issue of immigrants. And that is why if you talk, I fully agree with you that sometimes we need some kind of skilled and semi-skilled labor to move freely among nations. But if you make the focus on that, then it could ignite some kind of resistance and reluctance of the people to go more. So we need to think about that more carefully. Taking example, Hong Kong, if too many people come and then the real estate prices goes up, and then suddenly you have difficulty with opening up your economy, something like that.
I'm going to turn to Christine, but I just want to, are the microphones ready? Because I would like to open this up to audience questions in just a second. So Christine, a comment, and then we'll take questions from the floor.
Yeah, I actually agree with the Excellency's point because individual economies, they have their own reasons. They need to nurture their own talents as well. That should be the priority. So one thing we can do in the region is that, for example, in our bank, UOB, we actually partner with Foreign Trade University in Vietnam, whereby we provide training, proper banking training to students. Because at the end of the day, to ensure sustainability, you need to nurture local talents, and you need to take time. You cannot just ignite overnight, everything's happening. Of course, we can use technology to help. But at the end of the day, talents is something you have to take time to build. So what we do is we actually train them credit skills management. We teach them what is international finance. We also bring some of the students to Singapore and vice versa. And we can bring some of the people there to rotate, so that it will take time, but this is one way we can do. The other things, we also open up a mentoring program whereby we work with, like in Singapore, we work with the Singapore government, be able to offer various kind of training mentoring for startups in the region, not just within Singapore, but also in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Malaysia, so that we bring these people together. These startups, they just interact with each other. We create forum for them, and we truly put our people to mentor them step by step. So this will already promote collaboration. We also start to see business happen because they talk to each other, and also they be able to learn from each other. So I think these are the things that we can use the latest technology, cloud computing, as well as really put in education. I think at the end of the day, to ensure ASEAN growth is sustainable, I think we just have to invest people on the ground. I think that is what we have been doing. Yeah.
Thank you, Christine. So I think we can take some questions from the floor now. I see a hand over here and one right there. We'll come back to you. Please give us your name and your organization before your question, please.
My name is Simon Cox. I'm from The Economist magazine. My question is for Vice Minister Tran, if I may. It's a question about TPP-11, CPTPP. Which country do you think is more likely to join TPP-11 in the future, the United States or China?
Okay, I don't know. I don't know.
Good answer.
Because, you know, there is a very famous song, Que Sera Sera, and I just don't know about the future. But let me tell you what we are doing. So I remember everybody might know that the TPP negotiation started in 2010. No, it started in 2008. And for 7 years, we built up the new set of standards. And 11 countries without the US, we mean to maintain the high standards like that. And I bet that you already saw the outcome of Da Nang meeting. We suspend only 20 obligations among 1,000 obligations of TPP. We suspend only 20 obligations. So we would like to maintain the high set of standards of the TPP. And 11 countries, we mean to go forward. And you look at the list of the items that we need to finalize before the signing of CPTPP, we have only 4 items on that list. So we are very keen to have the early meeting among 11 countries to finalize those issues. And we look forward to early conclusion and early signing of CPTPP. Second, CPTPP is an open agreement. Living agreement and open agreement. It is open to everybody who accept our philosophy, who accept those standards. So we welcome the US to come back at any time. And this morning we heard Mr. Stratford said that it could happen in the near future, even under President Trump era. And if China feel like the TPP standards, they may come and they may consider to be a part of CPTPP. So we welcome everybody to come into joining us. So the main target here is that you have the new set of standards, because somebody said WTO could be not enough. So look at CPTPP and what it can bring to your country, to your region. And if you feel like it, you can come and join.
Thank you.
Hi, Your Excellency. I'm from Reuters. I'm going to follow up on my colleague's question. Do you have any expectation as chief negotiator for Vietnam of the timing of when this TPP deal could happen? And then to continue on your answer, does Vietnam still have any concerns about the TPP deal?
So great.
She's asking, when do you have any expectation of when the TPP deal will happen? Maybe you should stand up. I'm sorry, would you stand up, please?
Just need to be ratified.
Sorry.
Agreed.
Do you have any expectations of the timing for this new deal, Mr. Curtin
Okay, yeah. Yeah, like I said, we all 11 countries, we looking toward the early conclusion and signing of the CPTPP. We have a little bit more to go. That is the 4 issues that I mentioned that on the list of the finalization. So first of all, we need to meet with each other very early, and 11 countries are now discussing the possibility of organizing a meeting of the senior official in order to discuss those issues. So we look forward to early signing. And based on my experience with those issues, because we already have the clear instruction from the ministers in Da Nang and how to deal with those issues, so I look forward to flexibility and goodwill from everybody in order to conclude those issues. So if you come to the negotiation table with enough flexibility, enough goodwill to each other, if you really want that happen, I think that we can do that very quickly.
Other questions? Yes.
I'm a bit surprised when you talk about...
Sorry, you have a microphone. I just 1 second, please.
In the global order, I do not see any panelist speaker from China, Japan, or Korea. So are they being left out? I mean, they're the largest trader here. I'm sorry, but that's what I observed from the right?
Anybody like to handle that one? Christine is Greater China from UOB, so
yeah,
that's not completely true.
Well, actually, I'm a homegrown citizen. I'm a Hong Kong Chinese, grown up here, work in China, based in China, went through the WTO first generation in 80s working in China already with my old employer, HSBC. So I worked in Beijing and I've seen the I have gone through local incorporations with a couple of banks in China. So as I share early on, I think there are huge opportunities going forward, especially with Xi Jinping, after the People Congress, the 19th People Congress. There's a lot of opportunities with the Belt and Road, the opening up of the Greater Bay. It's the connecting, as I said, we see there's a lot of connecting the dots opportunity with the ASEAN, with China itself, that they are displaying and moving up the value chain, and with more and more educated as well as expensive labor costs. And that's just opening the opportunity for China, Taiwan, Hong Kong. To be very fair, Taiwan, quite a lot of really big corporations are global MNCs. I always said China, Taiwan have new MNCs coming out, renewed MNCs that create an opportunity to connect with ASEANs. And I see that are the opportunities, how we can be able to bring them together. I think this afternoon during the roundtables, there'll be more discussion around that. Yeah.
Good. Absolutely, but excellent question. Just to point out, so that you don't think the new global order has totally arrived yet, European FDI into ASEAN last year was more than the US and China combined. Okay. So Europe is still very relevant in the discussion in this. But Christine, thank you. And Belt and Road, no question going forward, will play a major role in the trade and investment equation. We're coming to the end of the panel, and I wanted to just give each panelist a chance to make one final comment. After a good tennis or golf lesson, the coach says, leaves you with a swing thought. You know, what is the one thing to keep in your mind when you leave your lesson to take away with you? So let me start with Christine. If you were going to say one thing very briefly to the audience they should keep in mind to the future of ASEAN trade and investment, what would it be?
I think instead of just attending conference, I strongly encourage all of you, go there, be there, and really seeing is believing. Don't just attend conference, and you'll find huge opportunities. Yeah.
Thank you. Carsten?
My advice would be actually double stroke, but first, go for the low-hanging fruits. That's all, like removing the NTBs, customs reforms, and don't be too proud to ask for help. I mean, the WTO has capacity building facilities, so implementing a TFA or even other standards, I mean, there is some help. You just need to sometimes jump over your own shadow and dare to ask. And secondly, because the gentleman mentioned Japan and all this One Belt, One Road, I think you have a fantastic, unique position in ASEAN. You can pick resources from One Belt, One Road, but you have also the Japanese government, JETRO. There's an Indian investment initiative. So there is so much possibility to upgrade your infrastructure, and you can pick and choose. You just don't need to take the Chinese at all. So you can really see what fits best, suits your country. And the only thing I would like to advise you there, again, if you, whatever you deal with a One Belt, One Road investment or from JETRO, try to make it sustainable. So not just putting money in, but basically put it in a border context. So if you build me a bridge crossing between Vietnam and Thailand, make sure that trade facilitation is something you tick the box and will happen, actually. Otherwise, it's a sunk investment.
So from my angle, it would be that on the one hand, all of the countries are very unique. At the same time, for me, it's really about learning from each other. I think the big advantage of the sub-region is that there is many ideas, many things already established. And I think building a little bit on what you just said is learn from each other to become quicker and not have to reinvent it again and again.
We'll give you the last word, Your Excellency.
Yes, I would be a bit lengthier because you know this is my first time, and that is why I have too many things that I would like to convey to you. So let me talk about 3 things. The first thing is that EU, ASEAN, you're coming from Europe, and I think this is the very right time to restart, to resume the discussion region to region is the right time. We initiated that back in 2005, and it was a bit immature at that time. Mainly because of ASEAN, we were not as a region at that time. But this time we are different, and this is why I do believe that it is the right time for EU to come and to talk region to region model. And second, Brexit. We don't know. There will be a discussion between the UK and the European Union. We wish you good luck. But anyhow, wherever you are, I think that the UK companies, that you are welcomed in ASEAN countries, and we really want to do business with you. Please come. And the third, we have the new global order. And I remember when I was very small like that, my father said that if you are strong, you can go out at any time. It is raining or it is even snowing outside, you can go out because you are strong. So the only way to deal with the new global order is making yourself strong. To make Vietnam strong, we're opening up our border, we invite the people to come, we raise the competition inside of the country. If you have the real competition in your country, you can become very strong one day. And we wish that ASEAN could do the same thing. We are united and we raise the competitiveness of all ASEAN countries by opening up our border for other people to come and to do business. So my message is keep going on. The history has never been a straight line. We can see that history going through up and downs, but mainly it goes up like that. So today you can have some kind of protectionism or individualism here and there, but keep going forward. And I think that we will be successful at the end of the day. And your presence here can be the very big proof of my prediction.
Thank you very much. I think you've gotten a very good overview. I started with the word optimism, and I think you can see from this discussion, whether you're looking at the eagerness and intensity with which business is approaching how it can be stronger and can reinforce the growth objectives of ASEAN, or the perspective of government and how we can go forward together. And to finish with your words, flexibility and goodwill.
Yep.
I think that's the spirit we all can be optimistic about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. No, please. I'll ask you to step down, because we're moving on to our next panel now. Thanks. My thanks to Don Koenig for chairing that panel. Great discussion. Many thanks too to the Vice Minister for his insights. It was you're being quizzed by the media while you're on panel, so they did a fantastic job. We now move to our next discussion, which is on connectivity in Asia. So if I can ask the panelists, please, to take the stage. Hong Kong, of course, positions itself as the superconnector, and one of the issues that is raised and discussed routinely at Asia House is the Belt and Road Initiative. There's a massive amount of interest in it. There's also a huge need for infrastructure spend in Asia. The Asia Development Bank earlier this year, in fact, at Asia House, presented its report, which showed that something in the order of $26 trillion is needed between now and 2030 for infrastructure in Asia, 1.7 trillion a year. So quite breathtaking amounts of money. And one of the pieces of work we've been doing at Asia House is how does one unlock private capital to invest in infrastructure spend. But now the connectivity panel, and it's going to be moderated, I'm pleased to say, by Jamil Andolini, who is Asia editor at the Financial Times. Jamil oversees coverage for the FT from Afghanistan to Australia, China, India, Indonesia and Japan as well. He's an award-winning journalist, he's a published author, and we're very pleased that he is part of our program today. And with that, I will hand over to Jamil. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I actually like to expand a little bit. I like to say Antarctica to Afghanistan to Hawaii, but it doesn't mean we have correspondents in all those places. So thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here. I have to say, an old friend of Asia House. Every time I go back to London, which is very often, I tend to go and visit, go for talks and to see old friends there. So I'm very pleased to be involved, and the Financial Times is very pleased to be involved in this today as well. So I'm going to introduce our panelists very briefly, and then we're going to get into a lively discussion. I've said more the sort of CNN rather than the Jerry Springer type of discussion. So a little conflict, a little bit of discussion, but no fisticuffs, please. So we'll start with John. John Muir is the Chief Operating Officer of ABP. And I've actually interviewed his colleagues, his boss, quite a few times in Beijing. But some of you may not know that ABP is one of the largest, if not the largest, Chinese developer, real estate developer in London. So quite interesting. Next to me here is Thierry de Longomar, who's the CFO of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So talking about Belt and Road Initiative, AIIB is crucial, right in the center and very closely involved in that initiative. Next to me is James Cameron. I was joking before, the director of Titanic, several other famous movies. No, so James is the head of infrastructure and real estate at HSBC, helping companies raise money in those sectors in particular. Gregory Hodkinson is the chairman of Arup, the engineering firm that many, I'm sure, of you will be aware of. And last but not least, Lincoln Leong is the CEO of MTR Corporation. So we've got a very good panel, a very high-end, hard-hitting panel, and I think we'll have a very good discussion. So I'm going to start with Gregory. When you're looking at this region, at Asia in particular, what do you see as the main possibilities for creating sustainable or smart cities? So where are the places you're looking, which countries, and what are the opportunities that you see, particularly for smart cities?
Okay, thanks for that. I'd just like to take a step back about smart cities for a second. I don't know whether this is working very well. Smart cities for a second. A city is smart, in common reference, it's related to technology, information technology, but I don't think that's the thing, really.
Do you have a hand mic? Just, yeah.
Thanks very much. I don't think that that's the thing, really. A city is smart if it's sustainable, that is, if it survives in the long run. And it's sustainable if it's resilient. So I'd like to address the idea of cities in that context. And cities, we're here talking about Asian trade, and of course cities form really principally as sort of nodes of trade. And the purpose of trade is not just to enrich the traders, but rather to benefit society as a whole. And in this era where we're seeing unparalleled a rate of population growth and urbanization, and unparalleled, and according to the demographers anyway, is a sort of very short-lived phenomenon that we're witnessing, particularly in Asia, but also in Africa. This idea that the population is going to grow rapidly, as it will do, between about now and 2050, and then essentially level off. And that's going to occur in Asia, it looks like, as well as in Africa, slightly later, but still the same kind of pattern. And that means the cities that we're building now need to be sustainable in the way that I defined it, because if they're not, in this tremendous period over one generation or so where we're building so rapidly, we're going to bake in a model for a trade, a model for economic development, a model for society that's potentially unsustainable. And we all know that we're bumping up against the limits of the planet to be able to support the human population. And this is especially the case in Asia and in Africa. So for me, the question of smart cities is, to be smart, you have to be sustainable. Let's make sure that we build sustainable cities in this once in a lifetime, literally, opportunity and responsibility, because we all know that the cities we leave behind stay there for a very long time. And unless we get it right now, we're putting our children and our grandchildren and their children in real harm. And I think that that's the most important thing that we have to focus on.
Well, thank you. I know that AIIB pays a lot of attention to the idea of sustainability. Your mantra, I think, for a while has been lean, clean, and green. I was wondering, what is AIIB focusing on around Asia? What are your priorities as a multilateral development bank in addressing the infrastructure gap here in Asia, Thierry?
Thank you, and thank you, Asia House, for hosting this interesting meeting today. Before answering specifically to the question, I heard this morning a very interesting comment by Lord Ashdown, who said that we are witnessing the end of 400 years of domination of the West on global institutions, and that there is now a space for a different option where China is now playing a major game. And I'm saying that because immediately I thought of President Xi's initiative in October 2013 to create what was then known as the Asia Infrastructure Bank, which became formally the AIIB. I'm saying that because it shows the central role that China has taken in dealing with major global issues, including infrastructure, and linking infrastructure to trade. You need good infrastructure to enable more trade within countries, within regions, and between regions. Yes, we have three sustainable priorities. One is sustainable infrastructure, one is cross-border connectivity, and the third one is private sector mobilization. Now, sustainable infrastructure, just a number, many numbers have floated around the infrastructure gap. I leave you with one: 1 trillion per year. You can think of a lot of literature, but 1 trillion per year. What does that mean? You need more actors. You need the public sector. You need government, who are the main driver of infrastructure spending. You need multilateral institutions like ourselves. You also need the private sector. So it is one of our major priorities. We are aiming at achieving it. We only started 18 months ago. We have so far only approved $4 billion of project, which looks like nothing compared to the 1 trillion gap, but we will thrive to increase our operations in Asia and outside of Asia. And just to finish, there is a confusion. We are not an instrument of the Belt and Road Initiative. The confusion is sourced because the Belt and Road Initiative, then called OBOR, was initiated at the same time as AIIB, i.e. in Jakarta 2013. We may invest in the region covered by the BRI, but we will invest outside of that region also, including outside of Asia.
Fair enough. I would say, I mean, I'm not trying to get into Jerry Springer stuff, but I would say that the Belt and Road Initiative seems to grow every month or two. That countries are all trying to sign on to something that is already in existence. So the country I grew up in, New Zealand, is trying to claim that it's the start of the Belt and Road. Like, a little bit of a hard argument, but anyway. So you may find that everywhere is part of the Belt and Road one day. James, I'd like to turn to you. Where do you see the potential for leapfrog development? Obviously, we're talking about the $1 trillion US dollar infrastructure gap, and some of these countries in Asia are really, really behind. Are there areas where you see real leapfrog opportunities, where there is just no existing infrastructure that countries can leap ahead?
Yep. Look, I think the fascinating thing and the exciting thing for us around the Asian infrastructure story at the moment is that there really isn't a country where infrastructure isn't important and isn't going to be a fundamental driver of how their economic growth develops and how their economic potential develops over the next 20 to 50 years. Both Thierry and Greg have mentioned two interesting elements of that. On the urbanization side, as well as it being the idea that the significant growth that we're having is going to drive significant urbanization, and getting that urbanization is going to be crucial to sustainability. It's also going to be crucial to economic growth. So making sure that that urbanization is done in an efficient and an effective way, such that, for example, in somewhere like Indonesia, we don't just create another 20 Jakartas where you have everybody spending their whole life in gridlock traffic with the pollution and the direct economic costs that creates is going to be fundamentally important. You go through different countries in the region, they're all at slightly different stages of economic development, and their infrastructure stock is all at slightly different stages. When you look at the $1 trillion funding gap, there are some consistencies. Fundamental infrastructure, so power and transport and water, are all consistently needed in different countries. But then you have different nuances within that. Some people need more baseload power. Others need more urban infrastructure. Others need greater connectivity between infrastructure, and then there's the piece around greater connectivity between different countries within the region. So it's very hard to pick out different areas. The scale of the requirement, whether it's $1 trillion, whether it's $1.7 trillion, demonstrates that the need is widespread, and therefore the solutions have to be varied and comprehensive.
Thank you, James. Lincoln, I'd like to turn to you. I was saying to Lincoln just before that I don't normally praise the panelists very much. As a journalist, I'm not supposed to, but I'm a huge fan of MTR. I moved from Beijing to Hong Kong, and I have to say, and I've traveled on the tube in London, the New York subway, I've traveled all over. I have to say the MTR is the best subway system in the world. Now, to balance that, I've got to ask them really hard questions. So anyway, I'll start off with an easy one. How is MTR seeking to capitalize on the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly in Southeast Asia?
No, and thank you very much for those compliments. As you know, we also run subways in Beijing as well as in London.
So that's a detraction mark, sorry. Lift your game, Lincoln.
No, the Belt and Road Initiative is a very important initiative for MTR. At least 65 countries along the Belt and Road. We also operate in Australia, which we claim is also part of the Belt and Road. For us, first and foremost, our activities along the Belt and Road would focus on the MTR Academy, something that we established about a year ago. The purpose, the emphasis of the MTR Academy is to provide training, information sharing amongst different rail operators, metro operators around the world, particularly in Southeast Asia, and particularly for rail companies along the Belt and Road. So we arrange courses in Hong Kong. We have colleagues from other metro companies come visit us here in Hong Kong to share best practice and really to learn from each other. So first and foremost, it's developing and enhancing the soft skills. Because I think what you find is in many countries along the Belt and Road, they are already building or in the throes of building out their rail systems and rail network. Take Vietnam, for example. Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh are both building out metro systems. So is Jakarta, so is the Philippines, India, Middle East. So what we're trying to do is contribute on as much on the soft side as opposed to just on the hard side. But one other comment I'd like to make is beyond the Belt and Road, we're seeing with urbanization that many of the panelists also talked about, with increased urbanization, we're now beginning to see the formation of city clusters. If one looks at the mainland of China as an example, that area around Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, over 100 million people, 110 million people. Enhanced connectivity will do wonders for the economic development of that region. Doesn't end there. If you look at the Greater Bay Area, which is something we're very familiar with here in Hong Kong. Imagine Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, large sections of Guangdong province have been connected and people being able to move around with ease in that region. And you're seeing that around Shanghai, you're seeing that around Chongqing, Chengdu. You're seeing that with high-speed rail development between Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. So all this really adds not just to the connectivity, but to economic development in all these regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. John, I'd like to turn to you now. When you're looking at, I know you're based in London most of the time, is that correct? Yeah. So when ABP is looking at where you want to locate projects, what are the main factors that you consider?
It's most important is the government. It knows what it's doing, and they have a firm mind on the strategic development.
You're saying the British government knows what they're doing? I'm not so sure. Maybe the London government knows what it's doing. Yeah.
But I think I want to bring it to a high level as well, as it's not just Paddy was saying that we are into a very important moment working with the China government between UK and China, but it has been echoed from David Cameron, Theresa May, and also the Chinese government. UK and China are truly in the golden era. And what that means is cooperation, collaborations. Now, on the back of the Belt and Road Initiative, we need to do something. Infrastructure is the backbone of delivering that. But what is those mean? Golden era, Belt and Road is about trade, business that actually have a sustainable base to grow on. Transportation, train, air, shippings, underground, this is all I call the first layer of infrastructure. But what it actually means and serve is really for the business who actually benefit from it. The local area, which is going to benefit from it. And that will create a long-term sustained relationship and sustained development or sustained initiative. And ABP has been chosen by Greater London Authority as a development partner to deliver the third business district in London for a very simple reason, because what we set out for is to build a 5 million square foot of business gateway between Asia and Europe, China and UK. And that is what we are set out to do. And as you know, people in here know, London is the gem of the crown in Europe. Brexit and no Brexit is always going to be the place in Europe that you want to do business. And you want to start with London and radiate your business to the rest part of Europe. And we well suited in the east part of London. And that is the government designated of opportunity. And later on, we got an enterprise zone status for Road Dock. And that actually gives a developer a lot of confidence to to work with the public sector. This is in a way of about private and public working together. Infrastructure by the public and commitment by the developer build a sustainable economic and social cycle in there.
Great, you raise an important point, and I think that's really interesting how you've pointed out how important the government support is for the decision to go into the Royal Albert Docks there and do that redevelopment. I want to ask everyone here, actually, I sort of open it up. I know, we're in Hong Kong, a lot of the people in the room are from Hong Kong, and we write a lot at the Financial Times about the Belt and Road Initiative. We've had some stories recently about how it's maybe not as vast and sort of all-consuming as it's kind of been made out to be. But what really is interesting for me is where Hong Kong fits into this Belt and Road, because I think there's a slight existential angst in the city about maybe Hong Kong is going to miss out on this amazing thing that it should be taking advantage of. So I just want to maybe ask all of you, and you can put up your hand and at the end, sir, at the end, you can at the end. I'm talking about the panelists first. You'll get your turn. And I heard your question before, so maybe we'll leave it right to the end. No Koreans or Japanese, sorry, but lots of Chinese. Why don't we start with you, James?
In terms of
what is Hong Kong's role in the Belt and Road? What is Hong Kong going to do? I mean, the reason I'm thinking of you first is because the obvious answer is as a financial center. But how does that work?
Look, I think there's a couple of key areas. I think the first point I'd make, Belt and Road Initiative is going to be one of the major macroeconomic factors that we're going to see over the next 10 years, because it coincides with one of the major macro requirements that needs to be solved, which is around infrastructure. But it won't, Chinese funding won't be the only funding. Chinese developers won't be the only developers that do go into infrastructure, but they will be playing an increasing and a material role over time. I think in terms of Hong Kong's role, there are a couple of very obvious areas. I think the first, as you say, is as a financial center. And there's a couple of elements to that. It's a location for Chinese companies, and we've seen for a long time, Chinese overseas subsidiaries based in Hong Kong, raising funds within Hong Kong or using a base in Hong Kong to raise funds on the global financial markets to support their Belt Road activities. And so we've seen corporates do this, we've seen SOEs do this, and we've seen the banks do this, to be able to raise funds, capital, to be able to support Belt and Road activities, both here in the region and more broadly. So I think that's the first place. I think the second point is Hong Kong as a location of expertise. So when you look at the profile of something like Belt and Road, you've got a large increase in Chinese activity, a large increase in the roles that Chinese clients are looking to play in a lot of new markets. In a lot of cases, a lot of those new markets are emerging markets and have relatively bespoke risks attached to them. And so within Hong Kong, both within the financial and in the consulting sector, you have a significant depth of expertise that can facilitate the management and understanding and structuring of those risks within those different investment and outbound opportunities from China. And Hong Kong, in a lot of respects, is a natural place for that to happen because, as I said earlier, it's always been the springboard, the location that Chinese companies have used for their international subsidiaries when they've viewed the rest of the world. And I think Hong Kong has taken a lot of steps over the last few years, both to position itself as that facilitator, both encouraging things like the One Belt, One Road conference, etc. here, where a lot of people come together, but also through organisations such as IFO, where you're looking to try and bring together a lot of those different areas of expertise that are going to be required to able to facilitate and enable China outbound investment along the Belt and Road.
Does anyone else have anything you'd like to add about Hong Kong's role?
Just two things. At the last Belt and Road conference that was here in Hong Kong, it had the clear endorsement from Beijing of a particular role as it related to, looking both ways internationally as well as into China, in professional services because of the things that James said, and especially in through ASEAN. So the road part of the Belt and Road, not the belt part.
Paradoxically, I'm sure you're all aware, the road goes through the water, the belt is on the land.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe Hong Kong can help rebranding One Belt, One Road, or Belt and Road. Yeah.
When I was growing up, I remember as a teenager, my sister had a belt that had lots of tassels on the end of it, and one of them might have reached to New Zealand.
Or came from New Zealand.
Thanks for that. Lincoln, do you have any other thoughts about, because at the conference, a recent conference I was at with Thierry actually, there was a lot of talk about how maybe MTR could leverage this Belt and Road even more. That, I mean, is the central government in Beijing helping you, for example, and suggesting government to government that you should be more involved in some of these countries?
Well, I think looking at it from a more macro perspective, getting back to your question of how Hong Kong can further participate in the Belt and Road Initiative, I absolutely agree that from a financing, from a software, from a consulting perspective, there are lots of opportunities, myriads of opportunities for companies based in Hong Kong and companies around the world. I think another aspect, which is what we have started doing a little bit of, is acting in some ways as a connector. Some people use the word super connector for Hong Kong, but it's a connector connecting and perhaps working with other companies, be that in the mainland of China, and going into Belt and Road markets. So for example, about a year ago, MTR signed an MOU with China Rail Corporation. That cooperation between ourselves and CRC really looks to see how we could work with China Rail Corporation and support their development outside of the mainland, particularly in high-speed rail development.
They can do the hardware and you can do the software.
We could do that, and to bring in other aspects from different business models. So for instance, we have a value capture business model that may be suitable for countries along the Belt and Road.
I want you to talk about that because one of my questions is about that value capture. I don't want to focus on you too much, but tell us a little bit about that. The what do you call it? It's R plus P, the Rail plus Property model, and how is that? How can that be adapted, do you think, around this region?
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's a model that's been in existence for centuries. In fact, it dates back from the UK. Remember the days when you used to have railway hotels above or adjacent to rail stations? Same concept. What this concept of so-called rail and property is a value capture model that captures adjacencies and turns adjacencies and value add from those adjacencies. In our case, it could be property development, and internalizes it within the company. So what we do here in Hong Kong is, in addition to building out the rail system and the stations, the tunnels, as well as the depots, we put property development above those stations, above those depots, and we capture value and share that value with our commuters, as well as Hong Kong government and the property developers.
Am I right in saying you're the biggest property owner in Hong Kong, or is that wrong?
No, that can't be right. I think everyone looks at MTR. We are a rail-based company. Property is a very important part of our business model, and that important part of our business model has us cooperating with property developers in developing those adjacencies. A number of people have asked us, well, building a 80-story skyscraper above a rail station may not be suitable for our city. And they could well be right. I think in many ways it's horses for courses. At the end of the day, value capture could be as simple as putting more shops in a station. It could be leveraging of advertising, or it could be having a small development adjacent to a particular station. It need not be on the scale that we have in Hong Kong. It very much depends on the needs, the requirements of a particular city to make it into, as was talked about before, a smart, sustainable city.
Yeah, could I just say something about that too? I mean, Lincoln was being a little bit diplomatic there. I think whether it's an 80-story building or not, I think every city needs to have concentrated development around its rail stations, and every city needs to have a metro system. Every city bigger than 1 million people absolutely must have a metro system, because the congestion that arises if you don't have becomes unsustainable, completely uneconomic. I mean, there are numbers that I think are a significant underestimate at the moment. For example, in, let's pick Jakarta, which says that congestion in Jakarta knocks 5% off GDP. You know, I mean, that's just, and you think of, you know, of course, Indonesia is the biggest economy in ASEAN. What's it, about half the UK economy? Pretty soon it'll be double. You know, to knock off 5% because you have congestion is completely untenable. So you must have public transport, you must have in particular metro rail, and then the high speed to connect the groups of cities, the city regions and so on and so forth. And you must have concentrated development above the stations. And if you're not doing, and around the stations, you know, walking distance or cycling distance of the station, and if you're not doing that as in a value capture model, you know, it's a complete economic waste. Yeah. So Hong Kong has definitely shown the way here in the modern era. I think the Brits have forgotten about the railway hotels. Completely shown the way here in the modern era. And other cities all over the region, and indeed all over the world ought to learn from it and do it. Every city that you go to will say, well, we can't do that because we've got regulations that prevent our rail company from interacting with property and so on and so forth. Well, change the regulations. You know, change them so that you can do it. Hong Kong is a model in that respect, and I think every other city needs to learn.
Just very quickly make one point on that. We absolutely support that, because this business model has worked well, not just for MTR, but for Hong Kong and the commuters in Hong Kong. And we're seeing that model being replicated in many cities and countries around the world now. We're seeing it in Australia, we're seeing it in the UK, we're seeing it in mainland China, we're seeing it in Beijing, we're seeing it in Hangzhou, in Shenzhen, etc. I'd like to make a further point on sustainability, though, which is many people think once you spent the billions of dollars building a metro rail network and the system, that's the end of it. It so goes and runs by itself perfectly forever and a day. Our experience is that the cost to maintain, upgrade, and replace the various parts of that system over a 40, 50-year life would be multiples, 3, 4 times the initial capital expenditure. So we're talking about sustainability not just in terms of building or putting in the initial capex, but that very long 40, 50 years of operation that requires continuous sustainability.
You need to go talk to New York City, I think. James, you had one last thing, and then I'm going to...
Yeah, sorry, just two things. In the one in terms of value capture, and we talked there around sort of urban rail, where absolutely agree with the model of having that within a sort of an integrated kind of evaluation of a project, and usually having some kind of connection between whoever integrates the rail, integrating the real estate piece, but also when you're looking at some of these larger, longer distance rail developments that we're seeing in the region, then that will have a broader impact on land values and, in some respects, not to overexpand it, but sort of country values. And you're going to see, as a result of that, some of the, I think, quite material changes in terms of where things like primary manufacturing locates, where you have logistics, commercial real estate development locating, as some of these areas become more connected, especially with mainland China. The second point that I was going to make, I think I've forgotten.
Okay. Nice segue. Thierry, we're talking about putting in rail that is extremely expensive. We're talking about private sector often getting involved, but what will often catalyze this is a bit of a push from the multilateral development bank. So how is AIIB looking to work with the private sector, and how are you trying to have that multiplier effect in the region in particular, in Asia?
Okay, thanks. Talking about railway, I did say before that the bulk of infrastructure is actually financed by public money. If you take the example of building a railway between Kunming and Vientiane, the cost is estimated to be between $8 and $10 billion. You have to compare that to the GDP of Lao PDR, which was in 2015, $15 billion. So it's just impossible for Lao PDR to support financing this railway. So you need other players. And indeed, the private sector is welcome. But there are three major challenges for the private sector. One is maturity. The second is construction risk. And the third is local currency financing. Maturity because the traditional players, the major banks, have a major issue in capital cost, which makes it more and more difficult to provide long-term financing, which is badly needed for infrastructure. That's one. Second, the construction risk. So with regard to maturity, we are happy to step in. We can lend up to 25 years, which is generally the right period for hard infrastructure. The second one is construction risk. The ideal formula would be for us to take the construction risk and then to hand over to the private sector for so-called greenfield infrastructure. We are working on those mechanisms. There's nothing I can say specifically, but we are working on such mechanism which will help us attract what we call the non-traditional lenders, which includes asset managers, pension funds, and insurance companies. We hope to achieve that. This has failed by the other multilateral development banks who were not able to attract the non-traditional lenders. We are trying to achieve that. The third point is local currency financing. This is critical. Most of the infrastructure we are talking about, once they are built, they generate revenues locally, which means in the local currency. To avoid any currency mismatch, you need to provide as much as possible long-term local currency financing. This is an area where multilateral institutions have the capacity or can explore the capacity or develop the capacity to offer that to therefore attract the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you tell us, I want to just follow on a little, could you tell us how you are working with the other you're the sort of new kid on the block. How are you working with the existing, I mean, some people have said you're maybe a competitor to the World Bank, but how is that relationship going to work?
It works very well. Currently, about 75 of our projects are co-financed with the World Bank, the IFC, EBRD, and ADB, and EIB.
75%?
75%. This is because we are building a new bank, so we need to build our own capacity to be able to finance projects by ourselves. But we are doing a few. Since you asked about the World Bank, they are more than happy to see us come in, because as you know, they have a major headroom constraint. They will need a capital increase. The US is against it. So their capacity is limited to $20 billion per year, which is small compared to the needs. And so they are more than happy to attract us in filling gaps in their infrastructure projects, mainly in Asia. The others too are very happy to see us join. As I said, with $1 trillion per year infrastructure gap, there is need for maximum players as opposed to fewer players.
I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to bring it back a little to One Belt, One Road, or Belt and Road Initiative, as it's now called, with John. How does the UK fit into, we're laughing about New Zealand, but the UK is also quite far along that belt, not the road. How is it fitting into this initiative, do you think?
Sure. You call New Zealand is the beginning of the Belt and Road, but I will claim London or UK is the end of the Belt and Road stuff.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I think this is important. London is always the gateway to Europe. Back to your previous questions about what is Hong Kong is going to be. And I think if you look at London and Hong Kong, it's pretty much is a reflect mirror just in different places. Hong Kong has got a very mature law, has got all the best talented people in this part of the world. And basically their experience on doing business and dealing with on the finance, but which is, we all got that in London as well, in UK as well. Hong Kong is a very special place because it used to, and probably still are, acting as the gateway to China and rest of the world. And with the Brexit coming, London probably likely to have the same kind of position, acting a gateway between Europe and rest of the world. Especially most important to Belt and Road, because it's, most Chinese or Asia investor go to invest in Europe, they would think about London. Last year, there's about £40 billion of investment into Europe. More than 53% gone to the UK. And there's an obvious reason. Asian investors are more comfortable coming to UK, coming to London. And we see the Belt and Road end with many signals. We got now the deep sea port in east of London. We also have the first running train all the way from Yiwu to Barking, East London, which is 10 minutes from where we are. And with all those things, we can actually see signaling, and also there's more cooperation with Manchester to direct with China as well. So we already see the end of Belt and Road is in UK and in London.
I'm going to open up for questions in about 5 or so minutes, so you can start thinking about your questions now. And I really prefer, well, I insist on questions, not statements, so not long-winded advertisements or statements, please. And if you go into a long-winded advertisement or statement, I'll cut you off and ignore you. Except for you can have your say, except for you, since you were so eager. Not yet, 5 more minutes. But in 5 or so minutes, I want to hear what you think Hong Kong's role in the Belt and Road Initiative is. Just that topic. Yeah, and if you have a question, you can ask it as well. But no statements. Besides the first one. I have a question for the whole panel, and feel free, all of the panel, to weigh in on this. We were talking about the 1 trillion infrastructure gap, but in that we're talking almost entirely about physical infrastructure, I think. I'm quite interested in the intangible infrastructure, the idea of how you get goods and services flowing more freely through this region. And I want to ask all the panelists if you have any thoughts on this. So I'm thinking in that things like standardization of trade practice, ease of, like the APEC card is a good example I can think of, a very small example, but the APEC business card, many of you in the room probably have it, allows you to go very quickly through customs without a visa into many of these countries. Can you guys tell me where you see real opportunities or real possibilities when it comes to the intangibles, like, say, the APEC card?
Well, I was just thinking when we're hearing about London being at one end of the Belt and Road. I hope it is. I live in London. It'd be nice to know that I could catch a train to Beijing, but
you'll have to change a couple of times.
Yeah. Well, there's a rail gauge problem.
Exactly.
Luckily,
which will never be solved because it's a military issue. Actually, the rail gauge is all about military. You don't want to allow anyone to be able to invade your country with a train very easily, so you change the gauge at the border.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
luckily we built the high-speed rail that links to the Channel Tunnel, so at least now you can get to Paris for lunch.
You can invade France easily.
Yeah. But in terms of disopportunity, if that's the word, there's the very real threat. It was discussed this morning, and Paddy Ashdown was getting worked up about it. There's the very real possibility of some form of customs border, which I guess is going to your question, which would be a really terrible idea. The logistics are just not there to be able to support it, and I can't imagine what the so-called technological solution would be to solve the problem on the Irish border, let alone anywhere else. So that's a problem with UK at the moment and Europe. But actually, the other side of that is what we need to do. We need to continue to work away at reducing customs, borders, and move towards real free trade. So, you know, any support, and all of the private sector players in the room, you know, would support that. And with the rate of development that we're seeing in the world and in Asia particularly, there is the opportunity to start, well, to continue, I would say, to dismantle customs and tariff borders, to really free up the movement of goods and people across borders, such that borders become less relevant.
How about, James, you had?
I was just going to say, I mean, a couple of points quite specifically to maybe the development of infrastructure, and then one of the points you made earlier around mobilization of institutional capital. I think the first thing, we see a lot of variation around risk allocation for projects for ostensibly the same sector, but in different countries, and then how that is then documented. And then that makes it quite inefficient for either investors or capital to be considering different projects in the same sector in different countries, and can often lead to effective an arbitrage by different investors because they'll concentrate on Indonesia because the risk allocation is more familiar, more favorable than, say, Vietnam. So some consistency there would be, I think, important, to break down some of those barriers that certainly when you're looking at cross-border investment flows in infrastructure would be positive. I think the second point is around when you're looking at trying to mobilize local currency institutional capital into different markets, you do have different regulations on some of those natural providers of long-term capital. So if you go to Vietnam, a local insurance company will have a different set of regulations around what it can and can't invest in compared to if you go to Indonesia and then if you go to Malaysia. And that's really influencing the rate of change in development and mobilization of some of those local capital forms of institutional money into infrastructure in those markets.
Well, the name of the game with regard to soft infrastructure is harmonization. Of trade harmonization, regulation harmonization, standard harmonization, but it's a long way.
Barcodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even ASEAN is miles away from this, aren't they? They've been trying for a long time and not really managing it. Okay, it's your time. I want to hear from you. What you think? Two things. All right, yeah. Yeah, it's coming.
What's the first one? You want me to?
I want you to say, what's Hong Kong's role in the Belt and Road Initiative?
Oh, not in the phase one, phase two. If you look at what China is doing in the Belt and Road, now even China's investment has stalled. The reason is, if you look at the Belt, which was a lot of former Soviet Union countries, so they're all landlocked. So the China building the railway is a gift from heaven for them. So they like it. And there is no political meddling. But on the roads, huge political problem. Number one, you have the United States, even India try to meddle with the Chinese politically. And then on the commercial or technology side, the Japanese is going to compete with China. So China is having headwind in the road. And that's why, and also the political risks are too high. Because you may flip, like Philippines, you used to be pro-American, now it's pro-China. But what happened? Flip again. So China, what I'm asking this conference, what's missing is that you don't have the digital technology or the future. Look at the largest company are all technology companies, Apple, Google, blah, blah, blah. So you build all your infrastructure, the American come in and reap the profit. When you say about connectivity, you only connect physical. You don't talk about connecting people. How do you connect people? Cell phones, telecoms, right? So the conference should also concentrate on that part. There's nothing there, nothing. Who are these guys, okay. Right? And they will come in.
You should talk to the conference organizers.
Yeah,
I'm just the moderator.
And secondly, what you are missing, also the Greater Bay Area. Because China is going to build a Greater Bay Area, which can compete with ASEAN. They're going to build it to $4.5 trillion economy in 20 years. Now, the other one on the Belt and Road is because of the problem along the road, and China decided, why don't we just improve soft string, right? Soft string, like maritime, transportation, satellite communications, 5G, so that there's less headwind over there. And the Greater Bay Area, even the Hong Kong government announced, they will concentrate on the maritime, because if you look at trade, ASEAN got a big problem. It's all connected by sea and thousands of miles, right? This is a big challenge.
So can I condense your answer to my question?
Okay.
Maritime,
Hong Kong can play a good role. And secondly, China will come in partnership with Hong Kong to soften up the China, what we call phobia, or China sensitivity.
I understand, yeah.
You understand?
Good, good.
So you see in the next 20 years, Hong Kong will play a very important part in the Belt and Road and also the Greater Bay Area.
Great.
That's what I'm trying to point out.
Thank you very much. Now,
can I say something about that?
Yeah.
I'm going to take issue with you.
Oh.
The Jerry Springer, right? the one trillion infrastructure gap in Asia that Thierry referred to. My calculation was 900 million, but I'll take some inflation.
That's per year, right?
Per annum. Yeah. Includes telecoms and the infrastructure through which digital operates. It doesn't include, the Huaweis and the Apples, but it includes the infrastructure. So sorry we haven't spoken about it, but it is definitely in those numbers, and it's definitely part of infrastructure. And on the gap side, ADB's number I think is 1.7, 1.8 total demand for infrastructure per annum, trillion in Asia. That wasn't a very logically put together sentence. Of which, again, the infrastructure to support digital is a very important component. And unlike the other components, are less problematic. And they're less problematic because the private sector can see what it is, they can invest in it, they are investing in it. The gap there's not much of a gap there, only in Laos and places like this. Everywhere else, the private sector is already operating, problem solved. We're concentrating on the sectors where there is a bigger problem in terms of supply and demand. And they are, the worst is water and sanitation, but it proceeds from water and sanitation through transportation to power and then telecoms.
Yeah. Questions, please. So there's one at the very back. Looks like, yeah.
Hi, Martin Murray from Asia Matters in Ireland, actually, south of the border. Could I ask you, if Brexit talks fail, what do the panel think this will mean for the integrity of the UK and the future of UK-Asia trade partnership? Thank you.
Who wants to approach that?
Wow.
Maybe that depends what you mean by fail. I think everybody talk about we're divorcing with Europe. So it is about what is the deal. And when you say fail, it means what? We don't get out or we get out? No deal. I don't think there's an option for no deal. Divorce, got to have a deal, or otherwise you continue with the process. You can't have no deal. And we are very confident that both Europe and UK want to come to a position that will work both of us in terms of benefit. To let you know that it's more than 40% of the finance actually comes through London, come through UK. I wouldn't thought that it would be a light say to say, no, it will go to Europe only, because it won't happen. All this investment would just go away from not UK, but also rest of the Europe as well. Remember, UK is only one country, but it's one of the biggest GDP of the whole group. And they will see that it's vitally important to continue work with us, even through this hard divorce negotiation. But that must be a deal. I trust that.
Question here from one of our colleague panelists.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just one statement. DHL, for example, is a huge data company. So the industry is constantly moving, converging. The reason why we invest over $360 million in Malaysia for our data center is just that. But we are also seeing Alibaba, Amazon become a logistics company. So just as a statement, there's a lot of movement. You don't need to have an old-fashioned telco on the panel anymore. But question to the panel, because we talked about more and more people moving into cities, and Asia will have probably the largest number of mega cities very soon, probably already has. So how about cargo? What's the concept of cargo? Because you need to ship more and more stuff and supply all these people living in mega cities. We talked about MTR for passengers, but how about the cargo concept? And is there anything in the AIIB, some projects in the pipeline as well?
For cargo specifically, are you looking at movement?
Well, the answer is that we are working on what we call a transport policy, which will look at alternative solutions. One aspect you didn't touch upon is actually climate change and the CO2 impact, and to find ways to reduce it, which includes better transportations or better means to exchange goods, which are less carbon print heavy.
Yeah, I think the other thing on that is if you look at some of the very large infrastructure spend that's going on, take Asia as an example, a lot of that is within heavy rail. Obviously there's a passenger element, high-speed rail, but if you look at, say, what's going on through Malaysia for double tracking, etc., it's around being able to facilitate, upgrade the rail infrastructure for cargo traffic. Likewise, a lot of the significant road and port infrastructure that's happening in a lot of, somewhere like Bangladesh in terms of upgrading the port, in terms of trying to build the road infrastructure between Dhaka and the port, is specifically focused on the fact that it can take 2 hours or it can take 12 hours to get from the port to Dhaka with goods.
Okay, I'm sorry that's all we have time for, but I'd just like to really thank the excellent panelists, made my job very easy, and I'd like to thank all of you, great audience, and thank you Asia House, and thank you.
Thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Jamil. Right, we now move on to our final keynote address. I'm delighted to welcome His Excellency Bambang Brojonegoro, Indonesia's Minister for National Development Planning, who's kindly flown to Hong Kong to take part in our conference to give the closing address. Please welcome the Minister to the stage.
Distinguished speakers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I'm honored to be here with all of you, distinguished gathering of participants from government as well as private sectors, and also my appreciation to the Asia House that has excellently organized this Asia House Signature Conference, Asia Trade in the New Global Order. I would also like to extend my appreciation to all panelists from private sector whose presence is essential to the success of the conference, and also to all of participants. I believe through this conference, we would be able to share experiences and best practices on developing and enhancing the economy and to exchange information and recent changes in the landscape of trade and investment in Asia with a specific focus on ASEAN. On this occasion, as committee of this conference said, that this forum will examine the path of the new global trade order and the shape it will ultimately take. It will also explore the opportunities and obstacles in regional integration in Southeast Asia and the role of connectivity as a driver of the growth. I would like to take this opportunity to share what our nation's vision in particular from our President, Joko Widodo, on Indonesia's global maritime fulcrum, and furthermore, I will give an overview of his ambition for the country's infrastructure and competitiveness and how this could shape the regional development. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of trade in Asia and ASEAN in particular, declining tariff and other barriers to trade along with trade facilitation efforts have supported increasing trade among Asia countries. In ASEAN context, total ASEAN trade has expanded significantly and intra-regional trade intensity also increases. ASEAN's FTA with neighboring countries has provided comprehensive coverage for deepening economic integration. However, in the future, the scheme of ASEAN +1 FTAs may be replaced by Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, an agreement between ASEAN member and 6 partner countries, China, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India. The agreement is intended to provide broader and deeper coverage than existing FTAs. Today, however, ASEAN countries, in particular the developing ones, face challenging global environment. Trade growth has been sluggish after the drop in 2012. This situation creates prospect for recovery, although some countries adopt increasingly inward-looking trade policy. The move by the USA to turn down the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, signaled a more protectionist administration and pivoted attention to the RCEP. Nevertheless, the goal of an agreement by end of year on the RCEP is still very difficult. This means that countries need to find new ways to stimulate trade and economic growth. One of the most pragmatic and effective ways to do this is through implementation of trade facilitation initiative and pushing investment as an engine of growth. Sorry. In its broader sense, trade facilitation is about reducing international trade costs. It will encompass customs and other regulatory trade procedures, trade and transport infrastructure, trade-related services. In this region, trade facilitation commitments have been implemented, through regional trade agreements, and several regional and sub-regional initiatives in Asia has already put trade facilitation as its main strategy. Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program, CAREC, trade facilitation strategy, for example, includes the Regional Improvement of Border Services Program, which coordinates infrastructure improvement and simplification of border crossing clearance procedures in selected border crossing points. Another initiative would be Greater Mekong Sub-Region Program and South Asia Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation, which focus on trade facilitation and connectivity to provide economic opportunities by lowering trade costs and enhancing the flow of goods, people, and resources. The recent Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, refers to the Silk Road Economic Belt, and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road can also be seen as one of trade facilitation initiatives in this region. This is a significant development strategy launched by the Chinese government with the intention of promoting economic cooperation among countries' roads, connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa along the proposed Belt and Road, and building 6 international economic cooperation corridors. BRI, or Belt and Road Initiative, will be synergized with various initiatives already underway at national and regional level, such as Master Plan for ASEAN Connectivity. Belt and Road Initiative is expected to strengthen relationship between China and ASEAN. This will also include promoting trade and investment, as well as supporting infrastructure projects such as railway and roads, which in turn, this will bring good impact for ASEAN in terms of economic growth, trade, investment, and job creation. From Indonesia point of view, the potential impact from BRI, Belt Road Initiative, is very significant. President Joko Widodo, on the mid-May 2017, attended the BRI Forum program in Beijing with 29 other heads of state. The meeting was then followed up by the appointment of the Coordinating Minister for Marine Affairs to lead the preparation of projects for Belt and Road Initiative, which include the industrial and tourism projects in our 4 provinces, namely North Sulawesi, North Kalimantan, North Sumatra, and Bali. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, The dynamism in Asia trade development will contribute to the new global trade order and create opportunity to all of us. One of the opportunities for Indonesia is to develop trade facilitation initiative that can help reduce regional disparity. This has been represented through the Maritime Development Initiative under the direction of our President. Our President has a vision and commitment to build Indonesia as global maritime fulcrum. In his inaugural speech as the President of Republic Indonesia, October 2014, President reminded all Indonesians about Indonesian Navy's motto, Indonesian Navy's motto, "Our glory is at the seas," and asked all Indonesians to return to the identity of Indonesia as a maritime nation. Our President further emphasized his global maritime fulcrum doctrine during the East Asia Summit meeting in Naypyidaw, Myanmar, November 2014. I read again what he already mentioned, that Indonesia realizes that a substantial transformation is taking place in the 21st century. The center of gravity of the geo-economic and geopolitical world is shifting from west to the east. Asian countries are on the rise. As the archipelagic state with its strategic location at the crossroad of Indian and Pacific Oceans, Indonesia must assert itself as the world maritime axis. And as a maritime country, this position opens opportunities for Indonesia to develop regional and international cooperation for the prosperity of the people. In the recent Indian Ocean Rim Association, or IORA, Business Summit held in Jakarta, March 2017, President also highlighted the vision to strengthen global maritime fulcrum and how it could be linked to Indian Ocean Rim Association. President's vision became the basis for Indonesia's endeavor in achieving sustainable growth and prosperity. Distinguished panelists, participants, ladies and gentlemen, in this forum, allow me to share recent economic condition of Indonesia. Indonesia is a big market, which is prospective for investment. At this moment, we are the 15th largest economy in the world, the 4th most populous country, and the top 5 emerging markets with the best middle-class potential. Our economic growth is relatively high and stable, with improving GDP per capita. In 2015, per capita GDP is $3,374 US, and 2016 increased to $3,605 US per capita. The increase in per capita income is mainly contributed by the rise of middle income class. From the expenditure side, relatively stable growth of health and education consumption, restaurant, hotel, transportation, and communication consumption, which is higher than the growth of total household consumption, is a result of the rise of the middle income class in Indonesia and indicates changes in consumption pattern of consumers towards leisure goods. The changing pattern of economy is also observed in the production side with the increasing importance of the ICT sector, the transportation and storage sector, supported by the rise of e-commerce and transportation startup. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, despite a positive economic condition, Indonesia is still facing disparity in our development. Global Maritime Fulcrum Vision is set as a developmental strategy focusing on regional development to create new growth centers by narrowing economic gap in our archipelago. The main issue is to enhance inter-island connectivity and strengthen the port infrastructure of the country under what we call the Maritime Highway Project. The project aims to reduce price disparity, particularly between Java and outside Java, and boost commerce within the country while positioning Indonesia as a hub for international trade in the broader ASEAN and Indo-Pacific regions. Development of infrastructure under Maritime Highway Project or other infrastructure projects do requires large amount of resources. Total value of investment required for infrastructure development in Indonesia in 5 years, 2015-2019, around $360 billion US. The government itself only contribute up to 41% of the investment, and a larger amount is expected to be contributed by private investment and our state-owned enterprise. To attract and secure more private investment and to realize our President's vision on infrastructure, the government of Indonesia has committed to improve Indonesia's rating in ease of doing business. Among its main target is to reduce the processing time of national investment permission to a maximum of 15 working days per type of permission in 2019, and to reduce time and number of procedures to start business to only 7 working days and 5 procedures in 2019. The government also continues the economic reforms agenda to improve the country's competitiveness. To name a few of the reforms, including implementing the 16th economic policy package, providing one-stop service for investment licensing process, providing incentive for investment like tax holiday, tax allowance, and import duty facilities, and amending the negative investment list to provide wider opportunities for investment. We will harness positive momentum on recent upward trend of economic growth supported by increasing investment, export growth, and improving government consumption. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the government of Indonesia is aware that the target of infrastructure development cannot be achieved by using a single approach or model of funding due to the limitation of state budget and private investment. We then devised strategy to diversify infrastructure financing through public-private partnership, PPP, and non-government budget equity financing scheme. The PPP scheme in Indonesia covers 19 sectors, including transportation, electricity, energy, urban facilities, and social facilities. The schemes include PPP with government guarantee, PPP with tariff and viability gap fund, PPP with availability payment for investment return, PPP with government in-kind or construction support, and PPP with success fee scheme, and of course, unsolicited PPP project. Under PPP-based project, we provide more opportunities for private sector to be involved starting from planning, preparation, transaction, construction, and operation. Some of the successful PPP schemes are coal-fired power plant in Central Java, Umbulan drinking water facility in East Java, and Palaparing optic fiber network and several toll roads. For equity financing scheme, the government of Indonesia has set 4 criteria for projects that are eligible for utilizing this scheme. First, a project is capable to support the achievement of development priority targets. Second, the project shows commercial viability. Third, the project has the potential to create economic and social benefits for the people. And lastly, the project needs to be ready for implementation. The equity financing scheme offers 3 alternatives of financing according to project condition. In the greenfield project or the new project, the investor can combine its own equity with loans from bank or financial institution to finance a project. For brownfield project, the new investor can supplement the original investment and bank loan with equity, bond, or recycle scheme to finance a new project. For the operational type of the project, the new investor may use securitization or divestment limited concession scheme to finance new project together with the original investor and bank loan. There are 3 main sectors for infrastructure project that can be supported through the equity financing scheme. The first one is connectivity covering toll roads, seaport, airports, and railways. The projects under connectivity sector are categorized as under identification states, and there are 16 projects in this category valuing around 16 billion US dollar. The second one is energy, covers electricity, oil and gas pipeline network, and coal. The projects under this sector are categorized as under preparation state, and one project amounted to around 1 billion US dollar. And the third one is manufacturing and industry sector that covers aerospace, integrated tourism resort, technology, and labor-intensive project. The project under this sector are categorized as under facilitation states, and there are 4 projects amounting around 2 billion US dollar. Currently, there are several foreign investors who have showed their interest and committed to invest and participating in infrastructure development in Indonesia using the equity financing scheme. They come from Korea, Japan, China, Singapore, Australia, and Canada. Hopefully, with this scheme, the government of Indonesia can accelerate the development of infrastructure, which in turn can boost economic growth, increasing trade and competitiveness, as well as reducing regional disparity. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude my speech today, on behalf of the government of Indonesia, I would like to attract the attention and build the awareness of all the participants of this conference towards recent trade dynamic in Asia. Economic integration, trade facilitation, and connectivity will be driver of growth in this region, and by saying that, I urge all of you to seize this opportunity. Finally, I hope the trade and economic cooperation created in Asia will not only create more benefits from economic side, but also be able to address development issues in the particular region. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's conference. It remains only for me to thank all of our speakers for sharing their insights, for their candor, to thank our sponsors, HSBC, Prudential, who are founding stakeholders of Asia House, and also UAB and ABP, and to thank the Asia House team for putting this together. Thank you very much, guys, and to thank all of you for being here. Please join us for lunch and hope to see you again soon. Have a good day. Thank you very much.